Welcome to People Tech, the podcast of WorkforceAI.news. I'm Mark Pfeffer, the editor, and I'm going to let my guest introduce herself.
Thank you, Mark. I'm Ramya. I am the general manager at Remote for Remote's HR management suite of products. So that means our HRIS, performance management offerings, and a suite of other exciting things that we'll be commercializing soon. If you don't know Remote is a global HR tech provider. We support teams in helping them hire, manage, and pay people across the globe. And we are active in over 190 countries. So thank you for having me here today.
And thanks for coming. This is the second time we've talked. The first time was in HR tech. There are no bars or free food anywhere around for us this time. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We'll make do.
First, tell me a little bit about Remote. What's the background and what was the thinking behind it?
So, Remote was born in 2019. Our founders, Joop van der Voet and Marcel Lebre, are based in Europe. And I think we just saw an opportunity, first and foremost, to democratize remote work and global employment in what we can all agree was a really unique time. The company's first product is called sort of Employer of Record. Since then, the company has come a long way. We are present in over 180 countries. We have local infrastructure in all of these countries that allow us to hire people and manage people. We have expanded our offerings to an entire suite of products across payroll, HR, and talent. So that includes products like EOR, but also contractors through running global payroll and through PEO, which is one of our latest offerings. And then we have a comprehensive suite of HR products that comprise everything from sort of, managing your people data within our platform all the way to sort of running the entire employee lifecycle experience.
Okay, so you've got a pretty comprehensive suite for HR there. And I'm curious what you're hearing from your customers and your prospects about AI, since it seems to be everybody's talking about it, obviously, and thinking about it when they're making their purchase decision. What do you hear?
So, the funny thing is, and I've talked to so many customers, especially recent days, about this very topic, is that no customers explicitly actually come and say, we want AI. How do we buy AI from you? And how do you leverage AI? That's not their first sort of question. Ultimately, companies come to Remote because they want to scale their teams. And they want to grow globally, and they want to grow compliantly, and they want to accelerate their growth first and foremost, depending on sort of their objectives. So they're interested to hear how our technology, our infrastructure, and our foundations will help them do that. And embedded in that conversation is, okay, how are you leveraging AI today in this time? Because, we see a lot of opportunities. We are thinking about this. We'd love your sort of help in thinking about this. But the first goal is they want us to solve their problems, and the problems can be solved today, yes, with AI, but first and foremost, you have to have sort of data, you have to have the right infrastructure, you have to have the right sort of logic and workflows and processes within your platform. To then sort of figure out how AI can assist, augment, and completely maybe own portions of that. And we have our philosophy, which I'm kind of glad to share more about in terms of how we think about leveraging AI within our platform. But we tend not to sort of talk about AI for the sake of AI, but more about sort of what sort of the actual problems are that companies are looking to solve.
So if your goal is really to solve the problems, but on the other hand, everybody's talking about AI. So how has AI impacted your roadmap and how you approach development? I mean, has it really changed your goals, or is it just enabling what you already wanted to do?
That's a really interesting question. So it's not changed our goals. What it has done is, one, changed how we build. So practically speaking, Remote as an organization really embraces AI in terms of like how we operate, how we build, like across every facet of the platform. And in practice, that might look like using AI to augment customer support within the platform and deflect and sort of handle a lot of sort of tier 1, tier 2 customer support use cases. It may impact sort of the technology and tools that we use for our teams, like our product and engineering and development teams, in terms of how they build and how we accelerate like the velocity of what we're shipping and bringing to market. So it's sort of embedded into the fabric of our company. In terms of how it manifests into the platform, we have the same goals. We always think about the customer problem. We think about what the customer wants to solve, and we think about the fastest and the most efficient way that they would want to solve it. And we factor in the expectations a lot of customers have today as users or consumers of AI, when you think about like a ChatGPT type of experience in terms of like what the logical sort of like way is to sort of solve that problem and what the customer expectation is going to be at this point in time today for how they would expect this problem to be solved. And then we make trade-offs and decisions based on factors like, is that the compliant way to solve the problem? How much risk is there to solve that specific problem within the platform, leveraging AI? Does it solve that completely? So do we need to scope that problem down into sort of more atomic units so that we can like tackle one set of the problem through AI, but sort of have a human sort of in the loop to responsibly sort of solve the whole equation for the customer? So everything is about thinking about the specific use case, the level of risk, the level of compliance, and sort of the completeness of how AI is equipped to like solve that task today. And then we make sort of an informed decision to embed that within the product.
Welcome to the Hire Her podcast, where women in talent call all the shots. We know, another recruiting podcast, just what the industry needs. Okay, but hear us out. You ever spend hours sourcing that perfect candidate, but they end up ghosting you harder than your Hinge date? Or finally, you get that hiring manager feedback, only for them to, of course, say, can we see more candidates? Lame, right? But let's talk about what's really lame in the industry. How is it that 65% of recruiters are brilliant women, yet most of the decision makers look like a convention for middle-aged dudes named Brad?
That's where we come in. Hire Her isn't just another podcast about hiring trends you already heard like 50 times this week. We're here to elevate women in talent, share their career journeys, and make sure they take the lead. Because let's face it, if recruiting is the backbone of every company, why are we still fighting for a seat at the table? So whether you're a recruiter, a talent leader, or just someone trying to swim through the sausage fest of TA leadership, we got you, girl. Welcome to Hire Her, the recruiting podcast where women's voices aren't just heard, but they're leading the conversation.
So subscribe now, because middle management Brad sure as hell isn't going to do it for you.
Have you ever wondered what really makes a generation tick? Who gets to pick the name? And why the slang keeps changing? Don't worry, I can help. My name's Dr. Megan Grace. On hashtag Gen Z, I share the voices and experiences of Generation Z, how they're different from other generations, what moves them, and why they do what they do. In each episode, we go beyond the buzzwords and the stereotypes to dive into real conversations and the insights that matter to making intergenerational collaboration a reality. You can catch hashtag Gen Z on the Work to Find podcast network and wherever you listen to podcasts.
When we were at HR Tech, one of the things that struck me is a lot of vendors were bringing everything back to experience. And a lot of that discussion really focused on their usability and their UI. Is AI helping with that? I mean, it seems to be pushing off a lot of voice navigation and supposedly can just let people ask in a more natural way to get to the same place. Are you finding that there's the demand for that? And is it improving the reaction that your end users have?
Oh, definitely. And the value of this can be seen in different ways across like a platform like ours. So if you think about like a lot of people leaders and HR use cases, like, these are really complex systems historically. Like it sounds like, yes, it's an HR system, but when you're dealing with so much data and data in and data out, like through different applications, like these systems can get really complex. And then it can also be complex depending on who the consumer of information is, like whether you're a people leader or a finance leader or an IT leader, like what you want to learn from the system is very different, even if you're asking the same question, and the answer is different for different people. So there's a lot of complexity there. So our goal, Remote's philosophy, and I think a lot of companies probably think this way, is that like you shouldn't be a BI analyst to be able to operate the system. Like you should be able to ask in sort of layperson terms, ask about insights. So when you are, I'll give you a tactical example. When you're thinking about like reporting, yes, like notionally you are pulling a report, but the goal really for a lot of leaders is insights, right? You're trying to understand like the data behind the report. Like, what does this report mean? Like, what am I trying to take away by looking at this report? So if you could just sort of lead with that question around the insight or the question you're trying to actually answer, then you are sort of like, and if you could see the data that's corresponding to that, that then allows you to sort of make better decisions. So I think like the shift we're seeing is like customers don't necessarily want to say, you know, pull up a report where I can see, you know, pay by, you know, gender, by like XYZ. They actually just want to understand like how is a set of decisions impacted like attrition within the company, or wanting to understand like gender pay equality within the company, but at sort of like a high level to understand the impact to their strategy. So some of the things that we are commercializing will just allow people to sort of ask, as you would to anyone if you were trying to sort of ask an expert on, you know, how is this data impacted, and allow us to pull up reporting for someone to use in that way. And that's sort of one use case where I think AI has sort of an outsized ability to support HR leaders, but also businesses to be able to operate more efficiently. Mm-hmm. Other examples are, you know, applications in, for example, like performance management. So today, especially if you're a large, you know, mid-market or enterprise org, teams will generally have a lot of individuals, and both on the employee side and then on the manager side, performance reviews sort of involve a lot of time and effort today. So just understanding like what someone did in the past, like what you yourself did in the last 6 months, understanding like your activity, your work, your outputs, and sort of contextualizing that in the context of a performance review can be pretty daunting and intimidating, like not knowing where to start from. Mm-hmm. So with AI, you now have the ability to mine sort of your work, if you will. If you operate in tools like Slack or Teams, you can like sort of task AI with sort of understanding like what you've accomplished and what you've achieved and what your challenges are. And you can sort of instrument that within the context of a performance review so that the data is there for you to access immediately. And similarly, on sort of the employer or manager side, you can synthesize and analyze like feedback points across a variety of different engagement points, and even understand things like who should be a part of the review cycle for a certain employee. Like, who does this person interact with the most across in their day-to-day? So those are not like obvious things as we go into sort of a more matrixed culture, like within teams and organizations.
You know, one of the things that's interesting about business software is the people using it are usually not the same people responsible for buying it. And the whole discussion about experience and UI and in automation and accomplishing, you know, other things with AI. Do you find that the users, the HR practitioners in this case, are they in the same place as their companies? I mean, you have to satisfy both, I'd imagine, but are they on really separate paths, or are they more or less trying to accomplish the same thing?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I would say that they are more or less like trying to accomplish the same thing, even if there are sort of subtle disconnects. Because ultimately, HR practitioners and users are all users like today of some sort of system and capability. Like we have this, like the really great thing about these kinds of systems is that we all are users of software ultimately today in most cases, and we all kind of understand like how we as like humans would like to work like within the context of a software system. So like maybe a practical example of this is like something like Slack, right? So today, if you think about employees or people using software, most employees, I would say, do not actually try to go to a software system to try to, like, from a context of HR, they actually don't want to log into the platform and perform their actions. They expect it to come to sort of where they operate today in terms of like their day-to-day. So whether it's like time off approvals or expense management or whatever actions they're taking, nudges for engagement surveys, like they expect all of that to come to where they're working so they can more easily like, activate on the action that they need to take. And I think like HR practitioners now recognize this because they're also users of a similar software within their organization. So they understand the sort of the need to come to the same place as employees. And ultimately, you're all kind of designing around like what's optimal for the organization to turn around in terms of actions and results.
Yeah. So one more question for you, and it's going back to AI, but it just occurred to me to ask, when do vendors stop talking about AI? When do you think it just isn't a big issue anymore, that it's just assumed and people are really focused on capabilities?
I don't think they care now, to be fully honest. I mean, they care about the applications of AI in terms of how to access, like, answer a question. And a very common example that I think we heard a lot about at HR Tech was this notion of having a layer that sits on top of different applications. So whether that's IT, HR Tech, apologies for the noise, whether that's like IT, HR Tech, finance sort of questions for them to be able to ask like a single insight and get the answer. And today there are already solutions like Remote has an MCP server. I think a lot of players in the market have sort of are working towards this, building this agnostic layer where you can have that sort of like question that is agnostic of like the underlying technology system, and then you can sort of get an answer. So to me, the moment at which like more platforms will tend to support sort of like that type of experience is when I think is sort of when you've sort of reached like a lot of like the big application of AI within the platform, and people will stop care because their fundamental needs of like question to insight will be matched, and then it'll be about like, okay, how does my underlying data work with the system? How do I consolidate more tools? How do I get most out of like the technology investments I'm making, given that now I have this sort of layer that sits in between me and my technology systems that will allow me to get the most out of what I'm looking to sort of accomplish in that day. But it's a tough question to answer. I don't quite know when people will stop caring. I think they will just understand that baseline capabilities now exist within all platforms, and then it frankly will be about the things that you can't still like automate with AI. So potentially true compliance, like capabilities, like infrastructure capabilities that you will still require to run things like payroll natively within countries that you can't sort of, AI away.
Well, Ramya, thanks so much for joining me today. It was great to talk to you. I hope we'll talk again. And everyone else, thanks for joining us on People Tech, the podcast of WorkforceAI.news. I'm Mark Pfeffer.
Thank you so much for having me.